The desert wind carried the scent of rain and gunpowder that night. A rare mix that only came when something was about to change. The storm rolled over Lone Mesa like a beast, growling across the black horizon. And through that thunder came the sound of hooves. A single rider, cloaked in dust and sorrow, pushed through the downpour toward the dim lights of Maddox Ranch. His name was Colt Maddox, a man built by hard land and harder years. The kind of man who didn't speak much, because his scars told his story better than words ever could. His hat brim dripped with rain. His jaw was tight as stone, and his eyes, cold, gray, and restless, carried the kind of pain that never healed, only settled deeper with time. Inside the ranch house, the fire flickered low when she knocked, 3 timid raps against the wooden door, barely audible over the storm's rage. Colt froze. No one came to Lone Mesa this time of year, not unless they were running from something. He opened the door slowly, and the wind howled in like a ghost. There she stood, soaked to the bone, trembling, her blue dress clinging to her like a memory she couldn't shake. Her hair, the color of wheat in summer, hung heavy with rain, and her eyes, those eyes, carried both fear and defiance. "Please," she whispered, voice cracking like a match in the wind. "I need shelter. Just for the night." Colt studied her, the mud on her hem, the bruise darkening her wrist, the way her hand gripped a small satchel like her life depended on it. He said nothing for a long while, only stepped aside and let her in. The firelight hit her face, revealing more than she probably wanted him to see. Trouble had followed her here, he could tell. But trouble was something Colt Maddox knew well. She stood by the hearth, warming her hands, glancing at him every now and then as if trying to decide whether he was danger or salvation. "You got a name?" he finally asked, voice low and rough as gravel. "Evelyn," she said softly. "Evelyn Hart." "Well, Miss Hart," he said, setting his hat down and throwing another log into the fire. "You picked a hell of a night to ride into nowhere." She managed a faint smile. "Nowhere's better than where I came from." He didn't press further. A man learns in the West that everyone's got ghosts, some just ride faster than others. But as the storm raged outside, the silence between them grew heavy, like the desert air before lightning strikes. She watched him from across the room, the way his broad shoulders moved, the quiet care in how he fixed the fire, the scars that ran like pale rivers down his forearms. There was something in him, strength, sadness, maybe both, that made her heartbeat trip in her chest. When the fire finally burned steady, she turned to him, her voice trembling. "Where should I sleep?" He hesitated, then walked to the corner of the room, where an old bed sat under a worn quilt. He pulled back the blanket, eyes never leaving hers, and said quietly, "Right here." She blinked, startled, a flush rising in her cheeks. I don't mean to trouble you, sir. I can sleep by the fire." But Colt shook his head. "You've been through hell, Miss Hart. I can see it plain as day. You'll sleep here, where it's warm. I'll take the chair." The crackle of the fire filled the silence. She looked at him, this stranger who owed her nothing but offered her everything. A broken soul needed kindness, safety, a quiet place to rest. Her lips trembled. "Why," she whispered. "Why are you being kind to me?" Colt's jaw tightened. He turned his gaze to the window, where lightning flashed across the desert sky. "'Cause once, someone showed me the same mercy. I didn't deserve it either." Something in her broke then. Maybe it was the wall she'd built to keep the world out. She nodded, tears mixing with the rain still clinging to her lashes. He turned away to give her privacy, listening as she slipped under the blanket. The room filled with the soft rhythm of her breathing. And for the first time in months, Colt felt something unfamiliar, peace. Hours passed. The storm began to die, leaving only the smell of wet earth and sagebrush. Colt sat in the chair, his eyes heavy, his thoughts wandering where he didn't want them to go, back to the war. The fire, the woman he'd once loved and buried beneath a cottonwood tree. He'd sworn never to care again, never to open that door inside him. But as he looked toward the bed and saw Evelyn sleeping, fragile, yet somehow unbroken, he felt that door crack, just a little. She stirred in her sleep, whispering something he couldn't make out. Her hand, pale and delicate, reached toward the empty space beside her, the kind of instinct that comes from too many lonely nights. Colt's chest tightened. Without meaning to, he rose and stepped closer, the floor creaking softly beneath his boots. He stopped himself from touching her, but he stood there for a long moment, just watching, protecting. Outside, the dawn began to bleed into the sky, streaks of red and gold painting the horizon. The storm had passed, but its mark remained, in the muddy roads, in the quiet air, and somewhere deep inside them both. When Evelyn awoke, the fire had died to embers, and Colt was gone. For a moment, panic flashed through her, until she saw the coffee pot on the stove, still warm, and a folded blanket draped over her shoulders. A note lay beside it, written in a firm, steady hand. "You're safe here. Eat something. We'll talk when I get back." She read it twice, her throat tightening. Outside, she could hear him, the rhythmic sound of an axe splitting wood. Steady, sure. And though she didn't know what waited for her beyond this ranch or what demons haunted the men who'd saved her, one thing was certain: for the first time in a long while, she wasn't running. She stood by the window, watching him through the morning light. The cowboy with eyes like a storm and a heart he swore was long dead. She didn't know it yet, but this night, this mercy, had changed everything. And as the wind whispered across the plains of Lone Mesa, a quiet promise hung in the air: some hearts weren't meant to stay buried forever. The morning sun rose over Lone Mesa, bleeding gold across the open plains. The rain had washed the world clean, leaving behind the scent of earth and new beginnings. But for Colt Maddox, there were no new beginnings, only the ghosts that trailed him like a shadow. He swung the axe one last time, the wood splitting clean with a satisfying crack, before wiping the sweat from his brow. From the porch, Evelyn watched him silently, the steam from her coffee curling in the cold air. He was a man carved from the same land he lived on, rough, scarred, and yet unshakably gentle. Every movement told a story: the way his hands lingered on the handle of the axe, the way his eyes drifted toward the horizon, searching for something he'd lost long ago. When Colt finally noticed her standing there, he gave a slow nod. "You sleep well." Evelyn smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Better than I have in months." He grunted, half in acknowledgement, half to hide the warmth those words stirred in him. "Good." "Breakfast's on the table. There's eggs and coffee, not much, but it'll do." She stepped inside, the wooden floor creaking under her boots. The small cabin smelled of smoke and pine, simple but alive. On the table lay 2 plates, one already set for her. She sat, hesitating before whispering, "You didn't have to do all this." "Didn't have to," he said quietly, pouring himself coffee. "Wanted to." The silence that followed wasn't heavy, it was the kind that speaks without words. Outside, the land stretched endlessly, wild and untamed, like the lives they both led. After a long pause, Evelyn finally spoke. "You're wondering what I'm running from." Colt didn't look up, but the tightening of his jaw told her she was right. "My husband," she said, voice trembling. "Or, the men who claimed to be." He ran the Hart Ranch near Dust Creek. "Everyone thought he was decent, a man of God," he said. "But behind closed doors." She stopped, her eyes glazing with pain. "He was a devil in disguise. I left the night he nearly killed me. I rode through that storm, praying to find somewhere I could just breathe again." Colt's hand froze on the cup. He looked at her then, not with pity, but with something stronger, deeper. "You did right. Ain't no man got the right to break a woman like that." Her voice cracked. "You don't understand. He'll come for me. He always does." Colt leaned back in his chair, the wood groaning under his weight. "Then he'll find I'm not as easy to scare." There was something in his tone that made her shiver, not out of fear, but safety. For the first time, someone wasn't telling her to run. Someone was standing between her and the storm. The hours passed slowly, filled with small tasks and long silences. Evelyn helped hang clothes to dry, fed the horses, and mended a torn sleeve of his old shirt. Colt watched her move around the place like she belonged there. Her laughter faint but real. Her presence softening corners of his world he thought were forever hard. By sundown, the sky burned orange and crimson. Colt sat on the porch, carving a piece of wood. When she stepped out carrying 2 tin mugs of coffee. "You don't talk much, do you?" she teased, sitting beside him. He smiled faintly, eyes fixed on the dying sun. "Talk's cheap. Out here, what matters is what a man does." She studied him quietly. "You lost someone, didn't you?" He froze, the knife pausing mid-cut. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind whispering through the sagebrush. Finally, he nodded. "My wife. Fire took her in the house. That's why I stayed out here, to forget." Evelyn's eyes softened. "You can't forget pain like that, Colt." "No," he said, his voice low, almost breaking. "But sometimes you can learn to live with it." They sat in silence as night crept across the land. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, lonely and haunting. Evelyn reached for her shawl, and as she did, her hand brushed his. The touch was accidental, fleeting, yet it lingered like a spark between them. Colt didn't pull away. Neither did she. Then came the sound of hooves. Distant, but fast, too fast. Colt's body tensed. "Stay inside," he said, rising to his feet. She knew that tone, the voice of a man ready for a fight. Before she could protest, he grabbed his rifle and stepped into the darkness. The riders came into view, 3 men, one of them wearing a wide-brimmed black hat. Evelyn's heart sank. She'd know that silhouette anywhere. Her husband. Well, the men sneered as he dismounted. "Seems my runaway wife found herself a hero." Colt didn't flinch. "Turn around and ride back. Ain't nothing for you here." The men laughed, a cruel, hollow sound. "You don't tell me what to do, cowboy. That woman's mine." Colt's jaw hardened. "Not anymore." The gunshot came sudden and sharp. Dust rose. Horses neighed. When the smoke cleared, the man's gun lay spinning in the dirt. Colt's bullet had knocked it clean from his hand. Evelyn screamed from the doorway, "Colt, don't." But it was too late. The man lunged, drawing a hidden knife. Colt blocked the strike, the two crashing into the mud, fists flying. It was brutal, raw, the kind of fight that comes from years of bottled rage. Then, with one final shove, Colt pinned him to the ground. The blade inches from his throat. "Go," Colt growled. "Before I stop showing mercy." The man's eyes burned with hate. But he saw the truth, Colt Maddox wasn't bluffing. Spitting blood, he staggered up, mounted his horse, and rode off into the darkness. The other men followed, tails between their legs. Evelyn rushed to Colt, tears streaming down her face. "You could have been killed." He looked at her, breathing hard. "Would have been worth it." For a moment, neither spoke. Then she threw her arms around him, holding him as if she could stop the world from spinning. He hesitated, then slowly, carefully, wrapped his arms around her too. The storm had passed, but this time, something new was left behind. Later that night, back in the cabin, Evelyn sat by the fire, her eyes glistening. "Where will I go now?" she whispered. Colt looked at her, then at the bed where she'd slept that first night. He walked over, pulled back the blanket, and said softly, the same words that had started it all, "Right here." She smiled through her tears. "And what if I never leave?" He smiled back, the kind of smile that had been buried for years. "Then maybe. That's what I've been waiting for." Outside, the moon rose over Lone Mesa, silver and silent. Inside, two broken hearts found a little peace, not because the past had vanished, but because they'd finally found someone willing to face it beside them. And in that quiet corner of the Wild West, love, fierce, fragile, and real, took root again beneath the stars.